So, when we left off yesterday, Dorothy was on the yellow brick road and she had just seen a scarecrow in the distance. Dorothy leaned her chin upon her hand and gazed thoughtfully at the scarecrow. Its head was a small sack stuffed with straw, with eyes, nose, and a mouth painted on it to represent a face. Then Dorothy was surprised to see one of the eyes slowly wink at her. She thought she must have been mistaken, for Kansas scarecrows never wink, but presently it nodded to her in a friendly way. "Good day," said the scarecrow in a rather husky voice. "Did you speak?" asked the girl in wonder. "Certainly," answered the scarecrow. "How do you do?" "I'm pretty well, thank you," replied Dorothy. "How do you do?" "I'm not feeling well," said the scarecrow with a smile, "for it is very tedious being perched up here to scare away crows." "Can't you get down?" asked Dorothy. "No, for this pole is stuck up my back. If you will please take away the pole, I shall be greatly obliged to you." Dorothy lifted the figure off the pole, for, being stuffed with straw, it was quite light. "Thank you," he said. "Who are you and where are you going?" "My name is Dorothy, and I am going to the Emerald City to ask the Great Oz to send me back to Kansas." "Where is the Emerald City?" he inquired, "and who is Oz?" "Why, don't you know?" she returned with surprise. "No, indeed, I don't know anything. You see, I'm stuffed, so I have no brains at all," he answered sadly. "Do you think if I go to the Emerald City with you that the Great Oz would give me some brains?" "I cannot tell," she returned, "but you may join me. If Oz won't give you any brains, you'll be no worse off than you are now." "That is true," said the scarecrow. "You see," he continued confidently, "I don't mind my body being stuffed because I cannot get hurt, but I do not want people to call me a fool, and if my head stays stuffed with straw instead of with brains as yours is, how am I to ever know anything?" They walked back to the yellow brick road and started along the path for the Emerald City. Toto sniffed and growled at the scarecrow. "Don't mind Toto," said Dorothy. "He never bites." "Oh, I'm not afraid of him. All I'm afraid of is a lighted match. Tell me about where you came from," he said as they walked. So she told him all about Kansas and how gray everything was there. The scarecrow could not understand why she wished to leave this beautiful country and go back to the gray place called Kansas. "That is because you have no brains," answered the girl. "No matter how dreary and gray our homes are, people would rather live there than anywhere else. There is no place like home." Toward evening, they came to a great forest where the trees grew so big and close together that their branches met over the road of yellow brick and shut out the remaining daylight. They stumbled along in the darkness until the scarecrow saw a little cottage. He led her to it, and Dorothy soon fell into a sound sleep with Toto beside her. The scarecrow, who was never tired, stood up in a corner and waited patiently until morning came. When Dorothy was awake, the sun was shining, and Toto was already out chasing birds and squirrels. She sat up and looked around. There was the scarecrow, still patiently waiting for her. They left the cottage and walked until they found a little spring, where Dorothy drank and bathed. Through the trees was a clearing by the roadside. There they sat down, and Dorothy opened her basket. She offered some bread to the scarecrow, but he refused. "I am never hungry," he said, "and it is a lucky thing I'm not, for my mouth is only painted, and if I should ever cut a hole in it so I could eat, the straw I am stuffed with would come out, and that would spoil the shape of my head." Dorothy saw at once that this was true, so she nodded and asked, "Won't you tell me a story while we're resting?" The scarecrow looked at her reproachfully and answered, "My life has been so short that I really know nothing whatever. I was only made the day before yesterday. When the farmer made my head, one of the first things he did was to paint my ears so that I could hear what was going on. Then he painted my right eye, and as soon as it was finished, I found myself looking at him and at everything around me with a great deal of curiosity, for this was my first glimpse of the world. The farmer carried me to the cornfield and set me up on a tall stick, where you found me." Dorothy packed her basket to go, but she was startled to hear a deep groan nearby. "What was that?" she asked timidly. "I can't imagine," replied the Scarecrow, "but we can go and see." They went back into the forest a few steps. Then Dorothy saw, standing beside one of the big trees with an axe in his hands, a man made entirely of tin. He stood perfectly motionless, as if he could not stir at all. Toto barked sharply and made a snap at the tin legs, which hurt his teeth. "Did you groan?" asked Dorothy. "Yes," answered the Tin Man, "I did. I've been groaning for more than a year, and no one has ever heard me before or come to help me." "What can I do for you?" she asked. "Please get the oil can from a shelf in my cottage and oil my joints," he said. Dorothy at once did as he asked. On her return, the Tin Woodman said, "Oil my neck first." So she oiled it, and as it was quite badly rusted, the Scarecrow took hold of the tin head and moved it. Gently from side to side until it worked freely, and then the man could turn it himself. "Now oil my joints and my arms," he said, and Dorothy did. Finally, the Tin Woodman lowered his axe. "This is a great comfort," he said. "I have been holding that axe in the air since I rusted a year ago. Now, if you will oil the joints of my legs, I'll be all right once more. I might have stood there always if you had not come along," he said, thanking them. "How did you happen to be here?" "We're going to the Emerald City to see the Great Oz," she said. "Why do you wish to see Oz?" he asked. "I want him to send me back to Kansas, and the Scarecrow wants him to put a few brains in his head," Dorothy replied. The Tin Woodman appeared to think deeply for a moment. Then he said, "Do you suppose Oz could give me a heart?" "Why, I guess so," Dorothy answered. "It would be as easy as giving the Scarecrow brains." "Well then, if you will allow me to join your party, I will also ask Oz to help me." "Come along," said the Scarecrow heartily, and Dorothy agreed. So the Tin Woodman shouldered his axe and asked Dorothy to put his oil can in her basket. They set out through the forest, and the Tin Woodman said, "During the year I stood there, I had time to think about the greatest loss I had ever known. It was the loss of my heart. Once I was in love, but the girl I loved lived with an old woman who didn't want her to marry me. So she had the Wicked Witch of the East cast a spell on me. So now I am made all of tin, and I am very lonely. No one can love who has not a heart." "All the same," said the Scarecrow, "I shall ask for brains instead of a heart, for a fool would not know what to do with a heart if he had one." "Once I had brains and a heart also, so having tried them both, I should much rather have a heart," returned the Woodsman, "for brains do not make one happy." Alrighty, we will stop there today, and I'll read you some more tomorrow.